Could you tell me what SUPER is?
So SUPER stands for Students United for Palestinian Equal Rights. We are a student-led organization here on campus. We're an SGP, and we work to educate people on Palestine and PSU's relationship to the Zionist entity. We also work to cut PSU's relationship to the apartheid state with campaigns like the Cut Ties with Boeing campaign, which started a while back, like a few years back. It didn't get resolved, but hopefully this year, third time's the charm. Hopefully we get PSU to cut ties with apartheid, but especially Boeing and other weapons manufacturers.
Why should we divest from Boeing? Could you elaborate a little bit on that? Or PSU should divest from Boeing?
So PSU has a huge recruitment deal with Boeing, where students are recruited to work for the weapons manufacturer. Because people know Boeing for its like aircrafts and airplanes and stuff like that. So they just think, oh, that's like my American Airlines flight. Like maybe, but it's also the world's second largest arms manufacturer, and it goes to the weaponry that it makes goes to fund the killing and destruction of people and countries like Yemen, Iraq, Palestine, Syria, the Philippines. But the reason that PSU should divest from Boeing is because it's the world's second largest arms manufacturer. It profits. It's a war profiteering company, profiting off the killing of millions of people and the destruction of whole countries. Lots of people at PSU are from those countries, and some of them are even recruited to manufacture weapons that go and harm people in their home countries. And PSU has a special recruitment deal with Boeing that is unlike any other recruitment deal that they have with any other university, which is very strange. So I think PSU has an even bigger responsibility than other institutions to divest fully from Boeing.
What do you feel like are the common misconceptions about the situation in Gaza with Palestine?
The common misconceptions, I think a big one is that it's a war. It's not a war. A war would be a conflict between two equal parties. We have a nuclear power with one of the strongest armies in the world, and then the Palestinian people who are just like guerrilla resistance groups and don't even have a military, don't have an army at all. And it's so unequal. It's not a war at all. It is a genocide. It's an occupation of an indigenous population. And this didn't, I think another thing is that people think that it just started now, and this did not just start now. Like, the resistance liberation movement has been going on since the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. This is not new. It's been going on for almost a century now, and it was bound to happen. Like a fight for liberation for a free Palestine was bound to happen.
How do you feel when people equate the entire Palestinian population to Hamas, or they will basically justify what's happening in Gaza right now by saying, oh, the Palestinians voted for Hamas or something of the sort?
It doesn't make any sense to me because, well, I mean, it's just like a blatantly like racist, Islamophobic trope. It's, one group of people does not represent the whole population of 2.2 million people in Gaza, and half of them are children. Like, half of them are children. I don't think that you can consider like half the population, 1.1 million children, as Hamas terrorists. And also the word of the use terrorist is, again, it's very much like what we saw post 9/11, calling any Arab essentially the dehumanization of Arabs, of Muslims, of Palestinians is happening again. It's done for a reason, and the dehumanization campaign is very intentional in trying to drive up support for the genocide and support for the Zionist entity.
What's your personal connection to SUPER? How did you get into this movement?
My personal connection, I'm Iraqi. I lived in Iraq and Syria for like 7 years of my life, and I know what it's like to be at the hands of the U.S. war machine, the U.S. imperialism. And I know that the U.S. is the biggest funder of Israeli aid, or aid to Israel. And I don't want to see what happened in Iraq and Syria happen in Palestine again. And I know that it's I see it happening complete. It's crazy. It's a complete mirror image of what happened in Iraq. And I don't know. I think for me personally, I just don't want that to happen. I want to do everything in my power as a student here to stop any funding to the Zionist entity.
How do you feel when people say that this issue is complicated?
I kind of almost understand them because there's so much misconceptions around Palestine and lies that we've all been told, and people when you ask most people, they didn't learn about Palestine at all in their 13 years of schooling. Not once did they learn, and they had to come to terms with it on their own, discover it through a TikTok or an article or a book that they just happened to come across. They have to learn about it by themselves, and that's why it might be a little more complicated for people than others, because if you're Palestinian, if you're Arab, if you're Muslim, you've known about this since you were born, because it directly affects you. It directly affects, harms your family, harms your country, harms yourself too. But it's not complicated. We have, again, one side with no army, no military, no power really at all, and barely any support from the Palestinians, because again, it's only in Gaza, it's not in the West Bank, it's not anywhere else, and it's a small percentage of the population, and it's very strange. It's not complicated at all. We have one profiteering, warmongering, US-backed country, and then the Palestinian people who have no one but themselves.
Coming from an Iraqi perspective, how does it feel when you just see so many people that really don't know what's going on around the world in the US?
I think for the longest time, I thought that people understood that, because you hear, the Iraq War was such a mistake. It was a mistake, even Bush is we shouldn't have done that. Yeah, it was a very big mistake. And minimizing it to a mistake after millions of people have been killed or displaced is kind of crazy, but I don't know, I thought that people understood that this should never happen again, that we should never start an invasion of a whole people, of a whole country, and do that again, commit another genocide, another displacement of millions of people. And I thought that people started to actually see us as human. I wasn't experiencing any racism for a while, and then I started to feel it again. And after this past month, that's when I realized people learned nothing. They actually learned nothing from the Iraq War. They learned nothing from the occupation invasion of Syria. They've learned nothing, and it's actually astounding to me, because it's really disappointing. But I do have hope in the people and people's power, people's voice. I think that the majority of people stand for a free Palestine. I think the majority of people don't want to see an occupation in Palestine. Maybe that's not being shown in the mainstream media. That's not what you're seeing on CNN. That's not what you're hearing about in the New York Times. But that's actually what's happening. The march on DC was 300,000 people in DC alone, and hundreds of thousands across the country. And that's not even including the world. It's insane. People have shown up to show their solidarity with Palestine. And yes, these big corporations are profiting off of their death and the destruction of Gaza. But I do think that eventually the people's voice, the people's power will win out.
Do you feel when Israel is talking about destroying Hamas, is that kind of a repetition of the rhetoric that we had around going into Afghanistan and Iraq?
Exactly. Yeah, they used Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and Al-Qaeda wasn't really a thing in Iraq until the U.S. invaded Iraq. But again, they use weapons of mass destruction, Al-Qaeda, these lies to get support, rally people behind their war profiteering cause. And it's exactly what's happening. The torture of civilians, Palestinian civilians in the West Bank, it reminded me completely of what I was seeing in Abu Ghraib in Iraq. And it's, again, like it's directly the mirroring of things like November, oh my God, no, it's not November, October 7th sounds exactly like September 11th. And it's like you're using these things to justify a whole genocide. It's exactly what happened. We're seeing the exact same thing happen, and I don't know how else to put it other than like, why is this still going on? Why is this pattern still happening? Because it's not even just like Iraq and Afghanistan. It's like indigenous people around the world. In Turtle Island, you saw this happen. In Australia, you saw this happen. In South Africa, you saw this happen. You've seen this happen like everywhere, and I think that. Another thing that gives me hope is the collective consciousness that's been happening. I think that people are becoming aware of the brutality of colonialism and settler colonialist like countries like Israel. So that is like something positive that's happened, is like people are actually aware of what's happening now.
What would you like to see happen? Do you want a ceasefire? Would you like to see like a two-state solution? Where do we go from here? Is it even possible to go somewhere?
I mean, what I would like to see is definitely a ceasefire. I think that they are carpet bombing Gaza to insane extreme, bombing like innocent civilians at insane numbers. Like it's indescribable, and honestly, it leaves me speechless. What I would love to see is like eventually a free Palestine, one state Palestine. Within my lifetime, I want to see a free Palestine, completely liberated, like what we saw in South Africa. The same thing, an end to apartheid, and the liberation of the Palestinian indigenous people.
Do you feel disappointed in your elected officials
Yes.
not signing on to the ceasefire resolution, and they're calling for humanitarian causes? And,
Yeah, I feel extreme disappointment with my elected officials. I know that Joe Biden has been saying like the most terrible things about Palestinians, about standing with the Zionists in like committing the genocide, and it makes me feel, because my taxes are going to the destruction of Gaza right now, and I feel like I have blood on my hands. We all have blood on our hands. Just being American citizens, anything that we spend our money on, like there's a Starbucks right behind us. I feel like I don't know. I feel very disappointed. I feel like I'm contributing to this, just being in the belly of the beast, just my existence here as a settler in Turtle Island. It feels, incredibly disappointing.